My cousin Rowan had been bugging me since the beginning of October to come down to Dunlow Creek for Halloween. Said they were reviving some old tradition called Lantern Watch. I'd never heard of it. He made it sound like a mix between a block party and some weird backwoods ritual candles, costumes, bonfires, something about safety, but he wouldn't explain much over the phone. Just kept saying, "You'll see. It's different here." I hadn't seen Rowan since his dad's funeral the year before, and part of me felt like I owed him a visit. Plus, I didn't really have Halloween plans. So I tossed a duffel in the Subaru, grabbed a hoodie and a pack of smokes, and made the drive from Richmond. The thing about Dunlow Creek is that it doesn't really show up on maps in a useful way. The last half hour of the drive was mostly unmarked gravel, narrow switchbacks, and occasional signs that were so faded they might have said, "Keep out" or "Turn back," depending on how you squinted. Service dropped out miles before I hit the actual town. I got there just before sunset. Air was cold in that dry, no-nonsense way you only get in the mountains. Rowan's house sat at the very end of a narrow hollow that curved back into thick trees. There were maybe half a dozen houses total along the gravel road, spaced out, slouched into the hillside, all with sagging porches and wood smoke trailing up through the bare trees. And everywhere lanterns, not store-bought stuff. Real glass lanterns, each one with a flickering candle inside, glowing faintly yellow. People were still out hanging them when I pulled up. Fence posts, porch railings, windowsills. Every house had at least 3 or 4. One guy across the way had nearly a dozen, all spaced evenly around his yard like a perimeter. Rowan came out as I was parking. Wore a flannel that didn't look like his, sleeves rolled up, big grin like I'd just shown up from overseas. He clapped me on the back and walked me inside like I belonged there. His place was simple. One story, kinda drafty, but clean. Couch that pulled out, pot of chili on the stove, a few photos of his folks stuck to the fridge with magnets. I dropped my stuff in the corner and opened a beer, and right away he started going on about the lanterns again. "You'll see," he said, pacing like he couldn't sit still. "You stay out after dark, you stay close to the lights. Doesn't matter how far you go, just stay where it's lit." I laughed. Thought he was being dramatic. He didn't even smirk, just gave me this look like he didn't have the energy to argue about it. Right before the sun dropped behind the ridge, someone knocked at the door. A kid girl, probably 11 or 12, stood there holding a crate full of small candles in glass jars. She handed Rowan a few, didn't say much. He nodded, said thanks like it was routine, and set one on the stoop, another in the front window. Then she looked up at me. "Keep yours lit till morning," she said. "If it goes out early, something might come in." She turned and walked away without another word. Didn't even wait for a reply. I glanced at Rowan, waiting for the punchline. He just lit the candles and closed the door. By the time it was fully dark, the whole road was glowing, soft yellow light lining the edges like runway lights. A few kids in costume wandered quietly between houses, but there weren't any doorbell rings or loud trick-or-treats, just hushed voices, small footsteps, and the occasional gust of wind. Honestly, it was kind of eerie. Peaceful but eerie. Rowan crashed out early. We'd eaten, finished half the chili, and he'd worked through most of a bottle of bourbon before knocking out on the couch with the TV still on low. I couldn't sleep. Too much caffeine from the drive, and I felt wired in that weird, not tired but you should be kind of way. So around 10:30, I stepped outside for a smoke. The air had that brittle edge to it, cold enough that the tip of your nose stings a little. The candle on the porch was still going, flickering steady, but something felt off. I didn't notice it right away, but I realized after a moment that everything had gone still. No bugs, no rustling. Even the trees past the last house had stopped moving. Then I heard the gravel crunching. Footsteps. Not fast, but heavy, deliberate. I leaned forward and looked down the road. Someone was walking, alone, no flashlight, no costume. Just this slow, lopsided limp and a coat that didn't look warm enough for the weather. They didn't seem drunk exactly, but their gait was strange, like their limbs weren't moving in sync. No sound but the crunch of the gravel. I figured maybe it was someone from one of the houses coming home late or wandering around. I turned on my phone flashlight, stepped off the porch. "Hey," I called out. "You all right?" They didn't even flinch. I walked forward maybe 20 feet. Then I saw it, the last lantern. None were lit beyond it, just black trees and curve of the road. And down at the edge, just where the light started to die, another person was standing. Still, watching. So now there were two, one limping toward me, one waiting in the shadows. I didn't like how the first one kept walking straight, not toward any house, not looking around, just locked into this weird, quiet path that ended where the light did. And when they crossed that line, where the lantern stopped, they both stopped. Then they looked at me, just stood there, not moving. And the one in front tilted its head. That was enough. I turned and ran. Full sprint, no looking back. Nearly wiped out on the gravel, heart pounding in my throat. I flew up the porch steps, slammed the door behind me hard enough to rattle the glass. Rowan bolted upright like he'd heard a gunshot. "You went past the lanterns?" he asked. I couldn't even speak. Just nodded, bent over, trying to breathe. He ran to the door, peered out, then yanked the couch across the entryway and dropped down beside it. "Don't talk," he whispered. "Don't move." I sat, every muscle locked up. A minute later, the porch creaked. Slow footsteps. One, then another. The candle on the porch flickered, then died. Rowan muttered something under his breath. Didn't move, didn't blink. Then the doorknob turned, a soft rattle. Once, then again. Then silence. We sat there for what felt like hours, not even shifting. Eventually, the wind started up again. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. The crickets came back. It was like the world had flipped a switch. Rowan lit another candle, set it by the door. "They don't come past the light," he said, almost too quiet to hear. I asked him what they were. He shook his head. "Not people. Not anymore. Something shows up every year. That's why we light them. All of us. Every house. You cross paths where it ends, you're open." I didn't sleep. Just sat there until the sky got light. I was 30 when Briar had been trying to get me out of the city for weeks. Said I looked like I was forgetting how to breathe right. Her idea of a reset was heading out to her mom's place in the backwoods of eastern Kentucky, where there's more deer than people and your phone dies out of pure boredom halfway through the drive. I gave in the week before Halloween. She called me from the Walmart parking lot while buying peanut butter cups and cheap beer and said, "Come on, just for the weekend." So I packed a duffel, loaded up on gas station coffee, and drove 5 hours east into the hills, through towns with more boarded up shops than open ones. By the time I hit Ash Creek Road, even the radio gave up trying. Aunt Marla's house sat at the end of a winding dirt track that felt like it should have collapsed in on itself decades ago. The trees leaned in so close they scraped the side mirrors, and I had to slow down more than once to let a possum or a sad-looking dog wander across. I hadn't been back since Uncle Roy's funeral 13 years earlier. I remembered the place being rough around the edges, but time had done it no favors. Houses along the road were sinking into the hills, trucks rusted down to frames, fences rotted into suggestion. Even so, Briar greeted me on the porch with that same big grin she always had when she was up to something. After dinner chili, cornbread, and wine we drank out of mason jars, Briar told me we were going trick-or-treating. "Like hell we are," I said, assuming she was joking. "No, I'm serious," she said, already halfway into her boots. "People still do it out here. It's fun. Weird, but fun." I blinked at her. "You're 32. She tossed me a pillowcase. "So what? You think we're gonna age out of candy?" I should have pushed harder, but she had that stubborn sparkle in her eye. The same one she had before she jumped into the lake off Miller's Bridge in 8th grade, even though it was frozen solid around the edges. So I pulled on my coat, and we stepped out into the chill. We started walking around 6, just as the sun ducked behind the ridge. The sky went dim fast, and shadows stretched out long and sharp across the gravel. Most of the houses were dark, no lights, no movement. Just a few porch steps leading into nothing. But some homes still had a glow in the windows. Old oil lamps or candlelight tucked inside carved pumpkins. The folks who answered the door were mostly elderly, They looked surprised to see us but happy. One woman called us young girls and pressed soft fudge into our hands like she'd been waiting all year for someone to show up. A man in flannel handed over popcorn balls the size of grapefruits. We even got a couple of what I'm pretty sure were homemade caramels wrapped in wax paper that stuck to themselves. It was strange but kind of nice. Familiar in that way old things are. After maybe half a dozen houses, the gravel narrowed down to a dirt path. Just a single lane, barely wide enough for a tractor. I figured that was our cue to turn back. But Briar stopped and pointed to a faint light further up the path. "That one's the best," she said. "He always gives something weird." "Who?" I asked. She just shook her head. "You'll see." It felt colder up there. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Like the trees were swallowing sound and heat the deeper we went. The smell changed too. Earthier, sharper. There was a scent like creosote and old iron, like walking under a train bridge. The light ahead flickered, not like a porch light, but like fire behind a dirty glass pane. As we rounded the bend, the house came into view. It was tall but sagging, 2 stories that looked like they were leaning into each other for balance. The porch slanted forward, the roof bowed in the middle. There weren't any decorations, no pumpkins or skeletons or anything cheerful. Just a single lantern hanging crooked over the porch steps, and beneath it stood a man in a dark wool coat, buttoned all the way up. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood there staring like he was waiting for a verdict. Briar nudged me. "You go first." I gave her a look. "You dragged me out here." She smiled, but her eyes were serious. So I stepped forward. I held up my pillowcase, more out of habit than anything, and said, "Trick or treat." The man stared at me for a few seconds longer than was comfortable. Then, without saying a word, he turned, stepped just inside the doorway, and returned holding a long, narrow box. It was dusty, dark wood, like something you'd store an old bottle in. He held it out to me. I didn't take it right away. "That's the treat," Briar said quietly behind me. So I took it. It was heavier than I expected, and the top slid open slightly as I shifted it. Inside, I caught a glimpse of something dark, maybe blue, folded neatly. "Thanks," I mumbled. But the man was already gone. The door had creaked shut behind him like he'd never been there. Briar turned without a word and started walking back. No jokes. No, wasn't that cool. "Wait," I called after her. "What is this?" She didn't answer. I opened the box. Inside was a strip of dark fabric, navy or black, stitched with tiny white dots like stars. Not printed stitched. Carefully, lovingly. It looked like it had been handled 1,000 times. It was warm to the touch. Beneath it was a lock of hair tied with twine. Human hair. I stopped walking. "What the hell is this, Briar?" She didn't stop. "Put it back, and don't talk until we get home." There was no room for argument in her voice. We walked the rest of the way in silence. Back at the house, Briar took the box and shoved it under her bed like she couldn't stand to look at it. "Just forget it," she said. But I couldn't. That night, I tossed in bed, replaying everything in my head. Around 1 in the morning, I got up for water. The hallway was dark, the kind of dark that swallows up your sense of direction. As I passed the living room, I noticed a light flickering. I figured someone had left the lamp on, but when I peeked in, the old television, the one that hadn't worked in over a decade, was glowing. Static. Low and quiet but steady, the screen buzzed with it. And then, for a second, it cut to black. And in the reflection, I saw myself. And behind me, something else. I turned fast. The hallway was empty, silent. I locked the door to the guest room and didn't sleep. In the morning, I told Briar. "You opened it," she said. I nodded. She didn't blink. "That wasn't a gift. That was a trade. You took something, so now it knows you." I waited for her to crack a smile. Tell me she was messing with me. But her face didn't move. She said folks used to leave things in the holler like that. Objects tied to memories, to people, to places they didn't want anymore. The idea was to wrap them up nice, give them away, and hope whatever came with them stayed gone. "That man," she said, "he's been dead 40 years. We left before noon." I told myself it was a prank. A hillbilly version of Halloween. That made more sense than the alternative. But 2 nights later, I came home from work and found my front door wide open. Nothing was stolen, not a single thing touched. except on my bed laid out perfectly flat was that same strip of star-stitched cloth. I didn't go inside. I walked 3 blocks to a hotel and stayed there for the rest of the week. My cousin Ray had lived in Halter's Ridge her whole life, which, in fairness, only made her slightly less weirded out by the place. It's one of those towns buried in the folds of the Blue Rock Mountains, technically part of the Appalachians, but even more forgotten. It wasn't even supposed to be a thing. Ray just got a little bold that year. Maybe bored. She texted me in late October, "Come up for Halloween. Let's actually enjoy it for once." That's literally what she wrote. No punctuation. And that's Ray. Bold, casual, doesn't overthink. Especially when it comes to this local superstition stuff. See, the town does Halloween. Just weirdly. Every year they put up the usual decorations, pumpkins, orange lights, hay bales on the porches, but nobody trick-or-treats. No one walks the streets after dark, not even teens looking to stir up trouble. Everything happens in the rec hall next to St. Alma's Church. They do chili pots, some light music, a lazy costume contest if someone's feeling festive. But it always ends before 10. People head home early. Lock up. Nobody says why, not directly, but they call it tradition. And like most traditions in places like that, it's really just a cover for fear. Ray never bought into any of it. She thought it was small-town paranoia held together by ghost stories and groupthink. "This town's terrified of its own shadow," she told me once. "You'd think the hills were crawling with boogeymen the way they talk." So this time, she wanted to do something different. Something rebellious, I guess. Her plan was to host a kind of anti-Halloween at our family's old cabin. The one just outside town, deep enough in the woods that cell service drops halfway up the trail. The place hadn't been used in years, not since our uncle passed. Nobody had cleaned it out, but nobody had trashed it either. It just sat, frozen in time. She said it would be simple. Drinks, music, a little fire. Just us. No town, no rules, no creeping superstition. I brought 2 friends from Knoxville, Mason, and Chelsea. Ray had met them both once before, on a summer trip. Mason's the kind of guy who always seems ready to start a fire or argue about rock bands from the 90s. Chelsea was quieter, kind of always observing the room, but funny in a dry, under-the-radar way. Good people for a night like this. We got to the cabin just before dusk. I remember the sound the car made turning off the gravel path. Kind of a final crunch. Like once the tires left the road, we weren't quite part of the regular world anymore. The cabin hadn't changed much. Still the same rough logs, stone chimney, that tin roof with a permanent sag. No electricity, no plumbing. Ray had gotten there early and started a fire in the stove. She had old oil lanterns lit around the room, casting these big soft halos of light across the walls. She brought a cooler packed with beer and snacks and rigged up a Bluetooth speaker to a battery pack. It felt like the kind of night we'd remember for being chill and maybe a little chaotic, in the way camping trips always are. At first, it was exactly that. We drank, joked around, played dumb songs way too loud. Ray tried to get us to dance at one point, which resulted in Mason falling over a log bench and spilling his drink into the firewood pile. We all laughed about that for way too long. It was after 8 when Mason stepped outside to pee. He came back in with this weird look on his face, kinda quiet. "A little off. There's someone walking around down by the creek," he said. Looked like they were wearing a costume. Ray didn't even look up. "It's Halloween. It's probably just some kids from town messing around." We all nodded. Mason gave a small shrug, like maybe he'd imagined it. We even joked about yelling down an invite to come up and join us. Probably would have if we hadn't already hit that mellow, sleepy kind of drunk where everything feels just barely funny. But Mason kept glancing at the window, like he was expecting something. I asked him quietly what exactly he saw. He said, "They stopped. Just stood there, looking up here." After that, the vibe shifted. Not dramatically, just, things got quieter. We didn't play another song. The fire popped a little louder. I started noticing how dark it was outside the lantern glow. Around 10, the wind kicked up a bit. Chelsea started wrapping herself in a blanket, and Ray decided to grab more firewood from the stack just off the porch. She didn't come back right away. I waited a minute, then another. When I got up and opened the door, she was just standing there, still looking. "There's more of them now," she said. Her voice was low. 4. just standing there. I stepped beside her and scanned the woods. I didn't see anything at first, just trees and brush, same as always. But then the clouds slid off the moon and it got brighter for a second, just enough to catch movement in the clearing below. Figures, 4 of them. They weren't moving. They weren't doing anything, just standing near the bend in the creek, shoulder width apart, perfectly spaced, watching. They wore masks. Not Halloween masks, not store-bought ones. These looked like white paper, or maybe old plaster blank faces, hollow dark eye sockets, and a slit where the mouth should be. Their clothes were just plain, old jackets, loose pants, stuff you'd find in a Goodwill bin. Nothing stylized, nothing playful, just people standing there. I said we should go inside, lock the door, turn everything off. Ray didn't move right away. It's probably the Haskins boys, she muttered, like she was trying to convince herself. They always screw around like this. But even as she said it, I could tell she didn't believe it. She came back in. We killed the music. The fire in the stove glowed enough to see each other by, but not much more. Nobody said anything for a while. We just sat there, waiting, listening. Then came the sound. A single creak. Not from outside, from the back room. It was faint, but unmistakable. Like the shift of a loose floorboard under weight. That made no sense. The front door hadn't opened. The only entrance was still locked. Nobody could have come in. Ray stood up fast and grabbed the fireplace poker. I grabbed the lantern and headed back. The room was cold. It always was. Just old blankets, a warped mirror, and the rusty frame of a bed. Nothing looked out of place until I saw the mirror. It was fogged up, like someone had just stood in front of it. Breathing, I moved to the window. Still latched. No cracks, no breeze, just silence. Then Chelsea screamed. I ran back. She was standing near the door, her hand over her mouth. One of them was on the porch now, close, right up against the glass. Same blank mask, but this one had red lines slashed across the mouth. Not neat lines. Rough, jagged. It looked wet. I couldn't tell if it was paint or something else. That's when I noticed the figure wasn't wearing the mask. It was holding it. Just holding it up to the glass. Like a signal. I said we should move to the back room. We could block the door with the bed frame, wait till morning if we had to. Mason just shook his head. They're already back there, he said. I saw one through the back window. My skin crawled. I went back, alone. The window was still latched, same as before. But this time, there were muddy prints on the floor, small, bare feet, not moving. Just there, facing the mirror. We weren't alone, and hadn't been. I ran back, told everyone to grab what they could. Leave the fire burning, I said. Make it look like we're still in here. We slipped out the back, past the trees, taking the long way around the trail. It was rough, but we didn't stop. We didn't look back. When we hit the road, it felt like breaking through a surface. A pickup truck came by maybe 40 minutes later. Old man, beard, heavy coat. He pulled over without hesitation. We didn't go back, not even in daylight. I hadn't been back to Marlow Creek in almost 10 years, not since my mom's funeral. She and I weren't especially close, and after I left for college, I never really had a reason to come back. But that fall, my uncle, her brother, passed and left me his cabin just outside town, near Hollow Ridge. Real quiet stretch of woods, no neighbors in sight, one dirt road in and out. Nothing fancy, but sturdy, old school. I figured I'd spend the season fixing it up and see how I felt. Maybe stay, maybe sell. It took about 3 days to realize why I left in the first place. Not that it was bad, just small. Everyone knew everyone, and if they didn't know you, they knew someone who did. I couldn't go into the grocery store without someone asking how my mom was, forgetting she'd been gone for years. They meant well, but it was like being stuck in someone else's scrapbook. One afternoon, I stopped by the town hall to check the mail, and this woman, Miss Janessa, flagged me down in the parking lot. Late 60s, wearing a pumpkin sweater and orange hoop earrings the size of cookies. She'd been running the local Halloween thing for decades, and apparently remembered me from when I was a kid. "Oh, you're Brenda's boy. You used to come to Hollowfest dressed like a little pirate." I had no idea what to say to that, so I just smiled and nodded. That was enough for her to rope me into helping out. Hollowfest is this annual Halloween carnival they do out at the old fairgrounds. Real homespun stuff, hay rides, costume contests, a corn maze, little haunted house made from PVC and tarps. It's harmless fun. Janessa asked if I could volunteer for the Saturday night shift, just cleanup duty and a little wash duty overnight. Said they needed someone to stay until morning and keep an eye on the grounds. Just make sure no one sneaks in and sets the corn maze on fire, she said, laughing like that had happened before. I figured, what the hell. She handed me a giant yellow key, told me where the utility shed was, and pointed me to the back gate where I could park my truck. The fairgrounds sat in a shallow valley behind the elementary school, surrounded on 3 sides by woods. No streetlights out there, just a porch bulb on the shed and whatever moonlight got through the clouds. It was quiet in a way that made you constantly aware of your own breathing. The cleanup finished around 10. The rest of the volunteers waved goodnight and left in dusty trucks. I walked a few laps with a flashlight, checked the fences. The place was dead still except for some raccoons clattering around the trash bins near the food trucks. Around midnight, I stood near the edge of the hay maze, smoking and thinking about whether I really wanted to stay in Marlow Creek. The town made me feel like a kid again, but not in a good way. Like I was waiting to grow up all over again. That's when I noticed something weird. Earlier, there'd been a kids' pumpkin carving contest under the pavilion. Whole row of tiny pumpkins on a folding table, maybe 25 or 30, all crooked faces and missing teeth. I'd helped move them myself. But now, when I looked over, there were only 4. Just 4 pumpkins, still lit, still sitting there. The rest were gone. I figured maybe some parents came back and took theirs home. Or the cleanup crew tossed a few. Still, I wandered over to check. The table was spotless. No bits of rind or pulp. No smudges or leftover candles. Just 4 carved pumpkins glowing faintly, each one with a different crooked grin. I looked in the trash bins. Nothing. Walked around the grounds, still nothing. No smashed pumpkins. No bits in the grass. Not even a trail. It was like someone had taken them without leaving a trace. That felt off. I went back to the shed, locked the door behind me, and pulled the heater close. There was this small folding chair inside, the kind that pinches your skin if you shift wrong. I sat there, arms crossed, listening to the space hum and hiss. At around 2 in the morning, I heard movement outside. Not the kind you ignore either. Real slow steps on the gravel, not heavy, but deliberate. I shut off the heater, then the light, and moved to the narrow window. There was a tall figure standing next to the swing set. I couldn't make out the face, just a silhouette, facing the corn maze, completely still. I watched for a good 2 minutes, waiting for it to move. It didn't. Then I cracked the window. That's when I heard the dragging sound. From the opposite side of the fairgrounds. Heavy, like someone pulling something behind them. A long scrape across dirt and dry grass. I couldn't see what it was, but it kept going for at least 30 seconds. Then, a knock. Not on the door. Not on the door. On the far wall of the shed. 3 slow, distinct taps. I backed away and stood still, tried to slow my breathing. I didn't want to open the door. I didn't want to move at all. About 20 minutes passed before I heard the dragging again. This time, right outside. Then nothing. I sat frozen in place, not blinking. The silence stretched so long I started to think I imagined the whole thing. Until I heard something else. Children, laughing. Right outside. That was somehow worse than the knocking. I got up, yanked open the door with my flashlight ready, but the grounds were empty. Dead quiet again. I walked slowly toward the corn maze. The entrance had been roped off where the cardboard sign earlier just said closed in red marker. But now the rope was gone, and the sign was lying in the dirt like someone had stepped on it. I stood at the entrance and shined the light in. One of the pumpkins was sitting about 10 feet in. Lit. I know it wasn't there before. It was one of the 4. Same jagged grin, same lopsided eyes. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I stepped into the maze. The first pumpkin flickered and went out. Another one lit up farther down. I followed it. That one went out. Another one lit up deeper in. One by one, they led me in, like stepping stones but glowing. I followed maybe 10 of them before I reached a small clearing in the center of the maze. There had been decorations there earlier. A scarecrow, a few paper bats hanging from string. But now, 6 kids were standing in the middle of the clearing. They didn't move, just stared. Old-fashioned costumes. Paper masks, sackcloth capes, fake fur ears made from glued-on felt. The kind of stuff you'd see in photos from the 40s. Their clothes were soaked, muddy, clinging to their arms and legs like they'd just crawled out of the ground. One of them pointed behind me. I turned. The scarecrow was gone. Its clothes lay in a pile at the base of the post, like something had stepped out of them. And then the tall man appeared, same figure from earlier. He stepped into the circle of light, head tilted just slightly. He was facing the maze again until his head snapped toward me in this stiff, unnatural jerk. That was enough. I turned and ran. I don't remember how I got out of the maze. Just the feel of stalks slapping my arms, my shirt ripping, the flashlight slipping out of my hand. I didn't stop until I hit the gravel road at the edge of the grounds. That night, I packed up my stuff and left Marlow Creek. My niece had been begging me for weeks to come visit for Halloween. She was turning 6 that year and had somehow gotten it into her head that trick-or-treating in the mountains would be extra magical. Her words, not mine. Lorna, my sister, had moved up to a little town called Elbridge about 4 years earlier. It's tucked deep into the Alleghenies. I figured, why not? I could make the drive up from Charleston, stay the weekend, hand out candy, maybe even help fix the loose railing on her back porch like I'd been promising for months. It sounded quiet, which I needed. I'd just gotten through a rough quarter at work, and the thought of escaping somewhere with no cell towers was more appealing than it should have been. Elbridge had this odd, frozen-in-time charm. One stop sign at the main intersection, a post office that was basically a wooden shack, and a diner that closed by 5 on the dot. No chain stores, no traffic lights. People there still waved at you from their porches, but with that cautious, measuring look, like they weren't totally sure what to make of someone new. Still, they were friendly enough, just careful. You could tell who lived there full-time and who didn't by the way they said hello. That afternoon, kids started trickling out of houses dressed as scarecrows and pumpkins and witches. There weren't a lot of them, maybe a couple dozen in total, but they had hand-sewn costumes and buckets already half full with candy from neighbors who'd clearly been prepping for weeks. Someone had rigged a hay wagon behind a pickup truck and was doing slow loops through the gravel roads, giving kids a ride between the farther out houses. Lorna and I had set up a folding table outside the fire station, really just a one-room garage with peeling red paint and a busted siren on top, and we handed out paper cups of warm cider and homemade donuts Lorna had stayed up the night before frying. Wren, my niece, wore a bat costume with these stiff little felt wings and plastic fangs that made her drool when she talked. She was buzzing with energy, darting between the hay wagon and our table like she was training for a sugar-fueled marathon. It was nicer than I'd expected, honestly. No big haunted houses or flashy decorations, just something warm and genuine. You could tell the whole town had pitched in. Even the high school kids stuck around to help sweep up hay afterward. Around 9, most of the little kids had been ushered home. The wagon made its final round and got parked beside the church across the road. A few of the older teens stayed to help us fold up tables and stack folding chairs back in the station. That's when this man walked up to me. I hadn't seen him earlier. He didn't look like a local. His clothes were clean but mismatched, and he had long, grayish blonde hair tied back in a loose knot. His face was worn like someone who'd spent too many winters outside. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself. Just looked at me for a second, then asked, "You staying up at Lorna's place?" I said yeah, surprised he knew who I was. He nodded toward the trees behind the church and said very calmly, "If you hear knocking tonight, don't open the door." And that was it. No follow-up, no wink like he was kidding. He just turned and walked off across the gravel, disappearing into the trees like he was headed somewhere he knew well. I stood there a moment, waiting for someone to laugh or say he was just messing with me, but nothing. When I asked Lorna who he was, she said she'd never seen him before. And up there, that's rare. You notice new faces. But she just shook her head and said, "Probably someone passing through." We got back to her place around 10:30. The cabin's tucked way back off a road called Calvert Run, one of those barely there gravel lanes where the trees crowd the shoulder and the branches scrape your windows if you're not careful. Her house sits near the end, perched on a ridge above a thick patch of woods. There are two other houses you can see through the trees, but both were dark and quiet that night. The place is small, just 2 bedrooms and a narrow kitchen that opens into the living room. I offered to take the couch since Ren had the second bedroom. Lorna showed me where the blankets were, gave Max the dog a biscuit, and said goodnight. She seemed tired, not worried. I stayed up for a bit, half watching videos on my phone, sipping the last of the cider. The fire in the wood stove had burned down low, just enough to glow. Max curled up near my feet, occasionally twitching in his sleep. Around midnight, I heard it, 3 knocks. Soft, from the back door. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. 3 evenly spaced knocks, slow and measured, like someone was standing right there, waiting for me to respond. I didn't move right away, just sat still, listening. My first thought was that maybe one of the neighbors needed something. Maybe someone's dog got loose or a car broke down. Then it came again. Same pattern. 3 knocks. Deliberate. I stood up, careful not to step on Max's tail, and moved toward the kitchen. That back door opened onto a tiny landing with a set of concrete steps that were always slick with moss. No one used it unless they had to. I flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. The floodlight didn't come on. I pressed my face to the glass. Nothing. The woods were pitch black beyond the railing. No movement, no sounds. I locked the deadbolt, made sure the knob was turned tight, went back to the couch. My skin was starting to prickle a little, but I told myself it could have been the wind or some animal brushing against the screen. At 1:20 it started again, this time from the front door. Not knocking, scraping. Long, slow drags across the wood, like fingernails or claws or something pretending to have either. Then silence. Then 3 sharp knocks. Max was already up this time, standing rigid under the coffee table with his ears flattened and tail low. He wasn't growling. He was just tense, frozen. I stood by the window and looked out. The porch was empty. Then came a knock on the side wall. Then one on the kitchen window. Then another from the basement door that sits under the floor near the laundry room. I didn't wake Lorna. I kept telling myself it was probably a teenager playing a weird prank. But deep down, it didn't feel like that. No one would have gone to that many points around the house without triggering the motion lights, if they were even working. And no one made any sound. No footsteps, no crunch of leaves, just knocking. It stopped around 2:40. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the kitchen holding a hammer I'd pulled from the drawer by the fridge, trying to listen past the sound of my own breathing. Max stayed glued to my leg. At 3:20, something tapped the window behind me. I spun around. There was a face, pressed to the glass. It looked human, but not fully. The proportions were wrong. The forehead was too high, the eyes too far apart. The jaw was long and narrow, almost canine. The skin was gray, not from the shadows, but actually gray, and had a kind of waxy, translucent look like old candle wax. And the mouth, it wasn't shaped right. It just hung there, like it was waiting to learn how to move. It didn't blink. It didn't move at all. It just stared. I stood there, not breathing. Then behind me, Lorna flipped on the hallway light, and the face vanished, like it had never been there. We called the county sheriff. They didn't come until morning. Said it was probably a trespasser, maybe a drunk. Said there were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing taken. They told us, if it happens again, try to document it. Like it was something ordinary. Later that morning, I told the story to a neighbor, a man named Arlen who lived 2 ridges over for nearly 60 years. He didn't look surprised, didn't ask questions, just nodded slowly and said, "Happens some years. Usually Halloween. Don't open the door no matter what it says." That was the part that stuck with me, no matter what it says. I didn't ask him what he meant. I left that afternoon. Haven't gone back for Halloween since. I was 16 when Halloween fell on a Sunday, and the church just outside of Farage decided to put together what they called a harvest alternative. Basically, their way of letting kids celebrate Halloween without actually calling it Halloween. I didn't really want to go. I'd already aged out of most of the fun stuff, and hanging around the church rec room with folding tables and plastic pumpkins wasn't exactly high on my list. But my cousin Cora had other plans. She showed up at our door in full pioneer mode bonnet, apron, some kind of long brown dress that looked like she'd stepped out of a one-room schoolhouse. She gave me that look, the one that said if I bailed, I was officially the worst person in the family. So I gave in. I threw on jeans and an orange hoodie and told people I was a leaf pile. It was the laziest costume imaginable, but I stuck with the joke, mostly for myself. The church sat at the edge of a hollow, where the land dipped down into a patchy field before giving way to thick woods. It was all gravel roads and scattered cabins out there, families tucked way back in the trees where the mailboxes leaned sideways, and porch lights were the only sign of life at night. That kind of quiet where you can hear gravel shift under tires from half a mile away. Some of the younger kids had walked up one of those gravel roads earlier to trick or treat at a house that always gave out full-size candy bars. Apparently, the guy who lived there was some retired music teacher who had a thing for over-the-top generosity once a year. It was about the only house out that way anyone still bothered to knock on. Around 8, after things started to wind down, Cora realized she'd lost her phone somewhere near the hay bales and asked me to go look with her. I didn't really want to. My fingers were already freezing, and the cider had gone cold. But I grabbed a flashlight from the rec room and followed her out behind the church. It was mostly empty by then. The parking lot still had a few cars, but the crowd had thinned out fast once the little kids got tired. The field behind the church was quiet, just a few paper cups and candy wrappers blowing through the grass. No one else was out there. We checked around the hay bales first. Nothing. Cora thought maybe it had fallen out of her pocket on the walk up the road earlier, so she pointed toward the gravel where it curved into the trees and said, "Let's just check a little bit up there." I hesitated. Not because I was scared exactly, but there was something about the way the tree swallowed the road. Still, I said okay. We could still hear faint music coming from the church speakers, and the glow from the parking lot lights filtered through the branches behind us. It didn't feel too far from safe. We walked a few hundred feet up before we stopped. The gravel crunched under our boots with every step, loud in the quiet. I told her to try calling it from my phone. While she was digging through her coat, I noticed something in the woods just off the road, maybe 20-30 feet back. At first, I thought it was a decoration someone forgot to take down. A tall, stiff-looking figure standing completely still between the trees. The flashlight hit something white near the face. Could have been a mask. Could have been just the way the light caught a piece of fabric. But it looked like a person, thin, upright, watching. I nudged Cora. "You see that?" She followed my gaze, squinted a little, then frowned. "That wasn't there earlier. It didn't move. Just stood there." I called out. Just a quick, "Hello?" Nothing brave about it, more reflex than anything else. The thing shifted, one step sideways. Behind a tree. We didn't wait. Cora whispered, "Let's just go back," and I was already turning. We walked fast, not running, but definitely not strolling anymore. My heart was pounding in a dull, echoey way, and the crunch of gravel under our feet suddenly felt way too loud. Neither of us said a word until we saw the edge of the parking lot come into view. We turned and looked back once. Nothing. Back inside, Cora checked her coat again and, of course, found the phone in the lining. Typical. I didn't even have the energy to be annoyed, just glad to be back under fluorescent lights with people nearby. We hung around for a while longer. Some of the parents had shown up to pick up kids. A few toddlers were passed out in their moms' laps. It all felt normal again, almost like whatever we saw didn't matter. Then one of the youth group guys, Tanner I think, came over and said a group was heading out to the old bus lot to play flashlight tag. Cora's face lit up. She loved that kind of stuff. I rolled my eyes and climbed into the back of a pickup with her and 5 others. The bus lot wasn't far, maybe half a mile down the same gravel road we'd walked earlier. Just a wide pull-off, surrounded by weeds and broken fencing, where the county used to park school buses before they built the new depot. There were still 3 old buses rusting out there, half sunk into the ground, their tires buried and windows shattered. Everyone spread out with their phones and flashlights. I stayed close to Cora. The place gave me the creeps even on a normal day. That night, with beams of light sweeping through the tall grass and shadows darting between rusted-out metal frames, it felt like we'd wandered into someone else's territory. The game didn't last long. I'd stepped behind one of the buses when I heard it. My name. Not yelled, whispered, drawn out like someone trying to sound playful or seductive, Or both. It wasn't Cora. I spun around with my flashlight. Nothing. At first, I thought someone was messing with me, hiding in the weeds, trying to scare me. Then I heard it again. My name, slow and careful, followed a few seconds later by Cora's. Same tone, same weird, measured pace, like someone repeating it from memory. But wrong. It sounded off. Not robotic exactly. Just rehearsed. Like someone trying to learn how to speak and not quite getting the rhythm. I ran back to the group. Everyone looked at me like I was overreacting. I asked if anyone had called our names. They all said no. Cora was still on the tailgate, swinging her feet and sipping Sprite from a plastic cup. I told her what I heard. Her expression shifted immediately, eyes wide, mouth pressed into a thin line. Then she said, "Remember the figure?" That was enough. We left. No one even argued. We piled back into the truck and didn't wait around to count heads. Back at the church, we went straight to Pastor Malcolm. We didn't even get the full story out before he interrupted us and asked if we'd seen someone in a white mask near the woods. Apparently, earlier that evening, a little girl told her mom that a tall ghost man had followed her to the porta potty and whispered her name in a robot voice. Everyone thought she was just being imaginative, until the mom went behind the porta potty and found footprints in the dirt. Big ones, not kid-sized. That was the end of the night. People left in groups. Parents grabbed their kids. We never found out who or what it was. The church never hosted another Halloween event after that. The Halloween fair at Pine Hollow Church was one of those small-town things that never really changed. Every year, the same handmade signs went up along Route 37. Aunt Maureen had volunteered there for as long as I could remember, so by default, my cousin Lila and I were part of the unofficial setup crew. We'd spend the afternoon taping orange streamers to the basement ceiling and untangling strings of plastic bats someone had stuffed into a box the year before without wrapping. I don't think anyone ever really questioned why the church threw such a big Halloween event, especially since Pastor Ellsworth had this vague fire and brimstone vibe on Sundays. But I guess even he figured it was better to have the kids bobbing for apples under the eye of the church than getting into trouble somewhere else. That year, Halloween landed on a Friday, and the turnout was huge. I remember the whole place buzzing, parents milling around in half-hearted costumes, toddlers in pumpkin onesies, teenagers pretending not to enjoy themselves. Lila and I had manned the candy toss game for about 2 hours before we finally stepped away. My hand was sticky from unwrapping too many mini Tootsie Rolls. The pews had all been pushed back to the walls, and the choir platform was converted into a puppet stage with a sad-looking Dracula sock puppet that kept falling over. The air smelled like kettle corn, old wood, and a hint of those rubber Halloween masks that get sweaty the second you put them on. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt safe, familiar, even fun. I was chewing on a piece of stale licorice when Aunt Maureen suddenly came over to where we were standing near the coat racks. She looked like she was still in full costume, green face paint, sparkly black cloak, fake warts and everything, but her expression had none of the usual playfulness. She leaned in and said something low to Lila, too quiet for me to hear, then crouched in front of me. "Stay in the basement," she said. Her voice was calm but firm in a way that made my stomach drop. "No matter what you hear, don't open the door for anyone unless I come myself." I blinked. "Wait, what? Why?" She didn't answer. Just stood up and gave Lila a look that clearly meant, "Go now." That was enough. Lila grabbed my hand, pulled me down the back stairwell, and led me straight into the supply room tucked behind the boiler. It was a narrow little space with metal shelving units and mismatched boxes labeled with masking tape. There was one window, small and rectangular, too high to see out of, and half covered by cobwebs. Without a word, she turned off the light, grabbed the tall filing cabinet near the wall, and shoved it across the floor until it blocked the door. The legs squealed across the concrete, but Lila didn't flinch. She just sat down, legs crossed, and clicked on the flashlight she'd pulled from her hoodie pocket. I sat beside her, not saying anything. Lila was 3 years older than me and had always been the one to crack jokes or taught big. Seeing her quiet and tense made me feel colder than the basement air. She passed me the leftover candy bowl, which still had a bunch of those cheap chocolate bars and fruit chews no one really wanted. I unwrapped the chocolate just to give myself something to do. The sound of the wrapper crinkling echoed more than it should have. And then everything went quiet. No laughter, no music from the speakers upstairs. Just silence. After a minute or two, I asked, "Why are we down here?" She didn't answer. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. It felt like we'd been waiting there forever when we finally heard the lock on the basement door click shut. Not slam, just a soft, deliberate click. And then, nothing. The silence after that was different. Heavier. I started counting seconds in my head just to have something to focus on. And then something upstairs shifted. There were footsteps, but not like before. No quick running or stomping. These were slow. Careful, just the occasional thud, like someone walking barefoot on wood, trying not to be heard. No voices, no laughter, just those quiet, deliberate steps. My whole body tensed. I could feel it in my arms, my legs, even the back of my jaw. Lila didn't move, just kept the flashlight angled at the floor between us. Then the footsteps reached the top of the basement stairs. Each footfall was too soft to be anyone in boots, but too heavy to be a kid. Just that strange middle ground where your brain keeps trying to make it fit someone normal but can't. They stopped outside the supply room door. I didn't dare breathe. Then something pressed against the filing cabinet. Lightly, not enough to move it, just enough to make the metal creak. Then 3 knocks, not loud, not hard, but each one made the cabinet rattle just a bit. And then a calm voice. "You left the door open." That was it. 5 words. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't Maureen. It wasn't anyone I'd heard at the fair. And it wasn't a question. It was a statement, like it knew we were in there, like it had already been watching. Lila reached for my hand, and her grip was hard. Her fingers dug into my knuckles. I couldn't tell if I was shaking or she was. The thing or person or whatever it was didn't try to open the door. It just stood there, long enough that my legs started cramping from how I was sitting. And then, finally, it walked away. Back up the stairs, same slow pace, same rhythm. When the footsteps stopped, the silence came back. That same awful, pressing stillness. Neither of us said anything. We didn't move, just sat there, waiting for something else to happen. An hour passed, maybe more. I couldn't check a clock. I just knew that every time I thought it was safe, I'd remember the way that voice had sounded. Like it had been waiting for us to speak. Eventually, we heard the basement door unlock again. And this time, a knock. Lila stood up, pushed the filing cabinet aside slowly, and opened the door. Aunt Maureen stood there. Her face looked pale and worn out, like she hadn't slept in days. The green paint on her face had smeared down one cheek, and her witch hat was gone. "Come on," she said. "We're leaving. Don't say anything yet." We followed her upstairs. The church was empty, decorations still hanging, candy still out, but the energy was gone. A few chairs were knocked over. One of the long folding tables near the punch bowl was broken clean down the middle. Nobody else was there, not one person. At home, after we locked every door and drew every curtain, Maureen finally sat us down in the kitchen and explained. "He came back," she said. I asked who. She hesitated, then said, "Someone who isn't supposed to be here." She told us he shows up every few years, always on Halloween, always in the ridge. Nobody ever sees him arrive. He just gets in. Into buildings, into homes, into places where people are supposed to be safe. He doesn't talk, she said, unless there's a child listening. I asked what would have happened if we'd opened the door. She just looked at me. Didn't need to answer. After that, she never let us go back to the Halloween fair. We stayed home every October 31st, kept the lights on, pretended it was just another night. That fall, the town of Renlo decided to bring back the old lantern trail for Halloween. My Aunt Sheila, who ran the general store up on Maple Bend, was one of the festival organizers. She volunteered me to help with setup. No warning, no asking. Just handed me a box of extension cords and told me to wear shoes I could ruin. So on the day before Halloween, we loaded up the old truck with battery-powered lanterns, faux pumpkins, cords, and a bag of half-working zip ties, and headed out to the walking trail that curved above Clear Fork Ridge. It was while I was untangling a string of lights near the upper switchback that I met Harlow. I remember the first thing I noticed about her was her boots, new leather, spotless, like they'd never seen dirt. Not the kind of thing you wear on a hiking trail in Appalachia. She was tall, probably in her late 20s, and had this long copper braid down her back that made her look like someone out of a fall magazine. Her face was pale, freckled, almost kind-looking. Not warm exactly, but calm in a way that made you let your guard down. She told me she was part of a traveling vendor circuit that did seasonal events, and that she'd be helping run one of the booths at the bottom of the trail, something with caramel popcorn and candy. She asked me questions while I worked. What school I went to, where I lived, how old Marnie was. Marnie's my sister. She was 12 then, loud in a way only youngest siblings can be, and still obsessed with drawing cat people and making slime out of school glue. At the time, I didn't think it was weird. Adults ask kids questions all the time. Harlow had a quiet way of talking that made everything feel casual. She laughed at my jokes, told a couple weird ones herself, and even offered me half of a ginger cookie from her pocket that I politely declined. That should have been it. But the next day, she was sitting on the steps of St. Peter's when Marnie and I passed by on the way to the corner store. Same boots, same braid, same smile. She didn't try to stop us or say anything, just raised her hand in a slow little wave like we'd been neighbors for years. I didn't tell Aunt Sheila right away. I figured maybe Harlow was just wandering around town killing time before the festival. But that night, while I was working my weekend shift at the diner, I spotted her again. She was standing across the street, under one of the flickering lampposts, watching through the front window. She didn't come in, didn't say a word, just stood there for almost an hour. When I finally glanced back, she was gone. It started getting weirder after that. Marnie came home with a pair of hand-carved earrings shaped like tiny pumpkins. Said a nice lady gave them to her as a Halloween gift. I asked what the lady looked like. She said she had a long red braid and a quiet voice. That's when Aunt Sheila sat me down after closing the store. She looked uncomfortable in a way I wasn't used to seeing. Sheila's the kind of woman who once swatted a possum off the porch with a broom while holding a cigarette in her teeth. But that night, her hands were tight around a mug of lukewarm coffee. She told me Harlow had been hanging around after hours, lurking behind the store, asking questions about my parents. When Aunt Sheila confronted her, Harlow didn't argue. Just smiled and said, "You don't know what's best for them," like it was some kind of warning. That night, we unplugged the doorbell and made sure the side windows were locked. Halloween evening was quiet at first. Uncle Ben had broken his foot earlier that week, fell off a ladder trying to hang one of those inflatable ghosts on the porch, so he was laid up in the recliner with a bag of ice and a plate of brownies. Marnie and I stayed in, watched cartoons, and ignored the few trick-or-treaters who tried to come up the hill. Around 9, Marnie went into the kitchen to grab something from the freezer. I stayed in the living room, half watching a low-budget vampire movie, trying to stay awake. Then I heard a knock. Not on the front door, on the side window above the kitchen sink. Then Marnie screamed. I dropped the remote and ran in. She was standing by the fridge, frozen, one hand still holding a box of frozen waffles. Her eyes were locked on the window. I looked. Nothing. Just black trees and fogged-up glass. She wouldn't talk for a minute. Just kept staring. Finally, she whispered. She was right there. Her face was against the glass. We checked outside. There were no footprints. No handprints. But under the windowsill, tucked carefully into a dry spot behind the shutter, was a small piece of folded paper. White, crisp, not even smudged from the dirt. It had a list of names. Mine, Marnie's, our full names, our birthdays, our old address from when we lived with my parents in Elkins. The next morning, we found out from a sheriff's deputy that Harlow had been kicked out of 3 other towns along the vendor route. No official charges, but there were rumors, accusations from families about following children, showing up at schools, even starting a small fire behind a gymnasium. She called it an accident, but the school didn't let her back. We burned the earrings that night, tossed them in the wood stove, and watched the paint bubble and peel. 2 nights later, I was alone at the house. Aunt Sheila had gone into town to pick up something for Uncle Ben, and Marnie was sleeping over at her friend Lara's. I turned on every light inside and out, kept the curtains closed, and double-checked the locks 3 times. At 10:05, the motion light in the backyard clicked on. I looked out the kitchen window. A figure was standing just past the edge of the light. Still, just far enough back that I couldn't see the face. They didn't move. Not once. Not once. I watched for almost a full minute, my hand clenched around the phone, my heart thudding so loud I could barely think. Then I called the sheriff. By the time he got there, the figure was gone. No sound, no footsteps. But lining the gravel path to the porch were 6 tiny pumpkins, each one carved with a single word. Together, they spelled out, L-E semi Kami. Just told me to stay with family and keep the porch lights on. 2 days later, a hiker found something buried in the woods. It was maybe a mile from our house, under a rotting tree stump near one of the side trails. Inside was a bundle twine, feathers, dried weeds, some chicken bones, a small lock of hair. And in the middle of it all, a photo. It was of Marnie and me, standing in a pumpkin patch. I was 8. She must have been 3. We were holding matching trick-or-treat buckets. I'd never seen that photo before in my life. The back had a date written in pen. It was the night of the Lantern Trail. After that, no one saw Harlow again. Some people said she went south, that a camper found her old tent site near Briar Hollow, filled with torn-up Polaroids and scraps of hair in plastic bags. But nothing ever came of it. The Lantern Trail was canceled the next year. They didn't try to bring it back again. That Halloween, my cousins and I were staying up in the Oak Ridge Hills with our grandma, who lived way out past where the pavement ends. Her house was this faded 2-story place tucked behind a crooked cattle gate, surrounded by pine and oak trees that always seemed to press in a little too close. It was the kind of place where the quiet wasn't peaceful. It just sort of hummed, like the woods were holding their breath. We'd never spent Halloween up there before. Usually, we were in town with pillowcases full of candy by 7 o'clock. But that year, our parents were off on some adult trip, so Grandma got us for the weekend. When we asked about trick-or-treating, she just gave us this tired little smile and said, "Ain't much of that up here, not unless you count Marlene's goats." We figured we'd make the best of it. Eli, my older cousin, had brought this beat-up shoebox stuffed with makeup, fake blood, and dollar store vampire teeth. He declared Grandma's living room our costume lab and started painting us up like gory messes. By late afternoon, we looked like we'd crawled out of a low-budget horror flick, and we were proud of it. Before we left, Grandma stood by the door and made us promise to be back before dark. Not just because of bears, she said, giving each of us that look she used when she meant business. There's older things than bears in these woods. Things that watch sometimes. Don't give them a reason. She tried to say it like a joke, but her voice didn't bend the right way. Uncle Darren, who'd been fixing the porch light, didn't laugh either. He just muttered, "Stay off the back road near the quarry," without even looking up. The first 2 houses we visited were exactly what you'd expect in a place where trick-or-treating isn't really a thing. The first belonged to a quiet couple who seemed confused but polite and gave us homemade popcorn balls wrapped in wax paper. The second was Marlene, who, true to Grandma's warning, lived with goats. She handed us damp paper towels with peanuts and raisins inside and told us we looked very festive. That probably should have been the whole night right there. But Eli wasn't ready to call it. He had this unshakable belief that there was always one more place worth checking out. "What about that White House?" he said. "The one we saw from the car on the way in. It's past the quarry, right?" May, my younger cousin, was already grumpy. Her shoes were too tight and her face paint had started to itch. She whined that her legs were tired, that her costume was too hot. I felt the same, honestly. But Eli was 12, and that meant he carried this annoying kind of authority, the kind that made you feel stupid for saying no, even when you wanted to. So we followed. The road past the quarry wasn't paved, just gravel that crunched under our sneakers and made every step feel like it echoed too loud. The trees were tall enough that they blocked most of the evening light. Eli's flashlight barely lit more than a few feet ahead, and we started walking in single file without really meaning to. Then we saw the pumpkin. It was sitting right on the edge of the road, perfect and bright, with a candle still glowing inside. Not melted down. Fresh. There was no house in sight, no walkway. Just that single pumpkin. Eli scooped it up with a grin. Free decoration. The moment his fingers wrapped around the stem, the candle snuffed out. No breeze. Just gone. That was the first time May really hesitated. She stopped walking and grabbed my sleeve. "I want to go back," she said. Her voice had gone small, but Eli was already ahead of us. "It's just a pumpkin. Come on. I stayed between them, trying to keep everyone moving while quietly wishing I'd spoken up more. The woods felt heavier somehow, like they were leaning in closer with each step. When we finally reached the house, I honestly thought we'd gotten the wrong place. The white paint had peeled back so far the boards underneath looked sunburned. There were no lights on, no porch swing, no decorations. Just dead leaves everywhere, except for the porch steps. Those were spotless. Not a single leaf. May refused to go any closer. She clung to my arm and stared at the house like it might blink. Eli went straight up the steps. Knocked twice. No answer. Then the door creaked open. Just a crack, but enough to see the hallway inside. It was narrow and shadowy and smelled like wet stone. Not damp wood, stone, like a cave. Eli looked back with that smug, told-you face, then stepped inside. I didn't want to go in. My feet actually stayed planted for a second longer than I meant, but May was shaking, and I couldn't leave her standing there alone. So we went after him. The hallway was lined with framed photographs. Dozens of them, covering the walls from knee-height to over our heads. They were all black and white, formal-looking, but the faces had no eyes. Not scratched out, just smooth. Like the photo paper hadn't printed them right. That happens with old pictures, Eli whispered, more to himself than to us. They fade weird, but nothing else in the photos was faded. One of them showed a kid in a devil costume, holding a pumpkin that looked exactly like the one Eli had picked up. That's when the door behind us closed. Quietly, just a soft click, like someone pressing down a piano key. May clutched my arm. "Where's the window?" she whispered. There weren't any. Just that hallway and a single doorway off to the left. Repeat in. It was a sitting room, empty fireplace, creaky wooden rocking chair, and a crib. Just sitting there, small, old-fashioned, empty. Then the crib moved. Not rocked, creaked, like someone leaned on it from the inside. Eli dropped the pumpkin. It rolled across the floor and bumped the crib leg. And then something started coming out of the fireplace. It didn't crawl, didn't lunge. It just leaned forward, slowly, like it had been crouched inside, waiting. It looked human, kind of, but wrong. The arms were too long, and the face was smeared with ash, no visible eyes. Just skin where the eyes should have been. Like the photos. May screamed, loud and raw. I grabbed her hand and turned, ready to bolt. But the hallway had changed. It stretched longer, way longer. The front door was gone. Eli tried to reach for the pumpkin again, like that would somehow fix it, but it had rolled under the crib. He crawled after it. He never screamed. He just stopped moving. Then we were running. I don't even remember deciding to move, just that we were suddenly outside, legs flying, lungs burning, gravel cutting May's feet because somewhere along the line she'd lost her shoes. When Grandma opened the door, she didn't say, "Where's Eli?" She didn't even look surprised. She looked at us like she already knew. Then she said, "You brought something back." I tried to tell her what happened. She cut me off. "You didn't give it anything, did you?" May said no. I said no. But then she noticed May's hand, curled into a fist. Inside was a photo. It showed 3 kids standing outside that White House. Our costumes, our faces, but Grandma knew better. She hung a horseshoe over the front door, salted every window frame, and told our parents we weren't coming back. And we didn't. I was 22 when I moved into my mom's old family place, a sagging 2-story house planted in the middle of nowhere in Appalachia. I just finished college and didn't have a real plan yet. Moving into the house was mostly about saving money and buying time, at least until I figured out what was next. It was supposed to be temporary. A few months, tops. Maybe help out with upkeep, sort through some of the junk my grandparents left behind, get a breather before diving into whatever was supposed to come next. That first October, people around town started talking about the Firehouse Chili Cook-Off. It was apparently a big deal, the one real event in the area. Everyone went. Free food, bonfire, costume contest for the kids. A friend of my mom's even dropped off a flyer, hand-drawn in colored pencil and photocopied to death. I kept it on the fridge for a week and fully meant to go. Then I found the box. It was a few days before Halloween. I was out in the old woodshed trying to make a dent in the chaos boxes of rusted tools, rotting lawn chairs, and a whole family of spiders that clearly resented the intrusion. Toward the back corner, I noticed a floorboard that wasn't nailed down like the others. I pried it up out of curiosity, half expecting to find mice or nothing at all. Instead, there was a box. Small, olive green, dented on one side like it had been dropped hard, military style. It looked like the kind of thing you'd find in a surplus store, but heavier. When I picked it up, something shifted inside. It made a dull, muted rattle, like metal on paper. The lock was rusted and mostly cosmetic at that point. A few prods with a flathead screwdriver and it popped off with a dry snap. Inside were several black and white photographs, a couple hand-drawn maps on aging paper, and a bundle of thick envelopes tied together with fraying twine. Everything inside smelled faintly of mildew and time like old books, sealed in a box too long. The photos caught my attention first. They were all of the same place, a small clearing in the woods, centered around a jagged, sharp-looking stone about waist-high, kind of like a broken fang rising out of the earth. There were no people in the photos, no landmarks beyond that single stone, but every shot was taken from the exact same angle, always the same composition. The only difference was the years written on the back, October 31st, with different years spanning what looked like at least 40 years. Different handwriting, same spot, same time of year. The maps were rough sketches, clearly made by hand. Trails, ridge lines, a few marked points. One of the trails ended with a little X near the edge of our property, maybe a quarter-mile uphill. I should have just put everything back and walked away, but I didn't. That night, while most of the county was at the firehouse eating spicy chili and bobbing for apples, I laced up my boots, grabbed a flashlight, and headed into the woods behind the house. It was easy to find. The trail, though overgrown, was still traceable if you paid attention. Roots curled across the path like lazy snakes. After about 10 or 15 minutes of climbing and ducking under branches, I stepped into a clearing. Just like the photos, same angle even. And there it was, that jagged stone, exactly where it had always been, surrounded by a patch of bare earth. The air felt off. Not cold, just too still. Like the trees were pausing, listening. Then I noticed the things scattered around the edges of the clearing, nestled into the roots of the trees, small objects. A rusted key, a single glove, buttons, half of a toy car, and one item I still can't forget, a tiny mud-caked baby shoe. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt like I shouldn't be there, like I'd walked in on something that wasn't done yet. I raised my phone, took a single picture, and turned to go back. Then I heard it. A voice, distant but clear, calm, flat, "Get in your plane." I stopped. It wasn't loud, more like someone talking just far enough away that you couldn't pinpoint where they were. I turned around, scanned with the flashlight. Nothing. Just trees. No footsteps. No movement. Again, "Get in your plane." Same tone. Monotone, like someone reading instructions they didn't understand. There was no edge to it, no urgency. That's what made it worse. The thing is, it sounded familiar. Not the words, but the rhythm, the inflection. Like something I'd heard before, somewhere I couldn't place. I've never flown a plane in my life. Never even been in one without white-knuckling the armrest. Still, I practically jogged back down the trail. That night, I had a dream. I was inside an old cockpit. Green metal, scratched dials, switches that clicked when I touched them. Outside the window, the sky was the color of dried blood, deep red, fading into black. Something was wrong. I could feel it. The engine sputtered, choking. I turned my head, fuel was pouring out of the wing. I didn't know what I was doing, but my hands moved anyway. Reaching, adjusting, flipping switches. The headset crackled, but no voice came through. Then I ditched. The water came up fast. The dream ended with me gasping underwater, trapped in the cockpit. I woke up choking. That was the first time. It came again the next Sunday, and the one after that. Each dream started closer to the crash. The sequence shortened. I stopped remembering the beginning and started waking up with the canopy pressing against my hands, screaming as cold water surged up my chest. And the next day, I'd hear it again. Always the same line, "Get in your plane." Different spots, different distance, but somewhere in the trees. I never told anyone. Who would I even tell?